The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber opened with a deep rumbling sound that echoed through the enormous room. Admiral Cato stepped inside and looked around at the circular chamber that was bigger than most human cities. The walls stretched up so high that he could barely see the ceiling, and floating platforms held representatives from 12 different alien species. Cato walked slowly to the small platform reserved for humans. It was positioned in the corner far from the center where the most powerful species sat. His footsteps echoed in the quiet chamber as dozens of alien eyes watched his every move. Some of those eyes glowed with strange colors. Others had multiple pupils, and a few belonged to creatures that looked more like living rocks than anything else. The human platform was the smallest one in the room, and it sat lower than all the others. It was a clear message about where humans ranked in the galactic order. Cato had attended these meetings for 3 years now, and the seating arrangement never changed. The message was always the same. Humans were tolerated but not respected. Chancellor Vextar sat on the highest platform in the center of the room. His reptilian body was covered in dark green scales that caught the light from the floating orbs above. The reptilian empire controlled 17 star systems and had the largest military fleet in the galaxy. When Vextar spoke, everyone else listened whether they wanted to or not. The Chancellor's yellow eyes swept across the chamber as he began the meeting. His voice was deep and carried the authority of someone who had never been challenged in his long life. The topic today was military readiness and defense strategies against unknown threats. From outside their region of space, one by one, the alien representatives spoke about their military capabilities. The avian speaker, Krisa, bragged about her species' ability to fly between planets without ships. Her people had natural wings that could somehow work in the vacuum of space, and they could see enemies from distances that normal eyes could never reach. The Granite people sent their representative Thokron, who spoke in a voice that sounded like rocks grinding together. His species was nearly indestructible, with skin harder than most metals and strength that could crush steel with bare hands. They had never lost a ground battle in their entire history. The energy beings called themselves the Luminous Ones, and their representative, Brightflow, appeared as a shifting ball of pure light. They could pass through solid matter, and their touch could disable any electronic system. They considered themselves the most advanced species in the galaxy because they had evolved beyond physical form. Each species took their turn describing why they were superior fighters. The aquatic people could survive in any liquid environment. The insectoid race could reproduce armies in weeks instead of years. The plant-based aliens could regrow lost body parts and communicate across vast distances through root networks that connected entire planets. Admiral Cato listened to it all without speaking. He had heard these same boasts many times before. Each species was proud of their natural advantages, and they all looked down on humans for not having similar gifts. Humans couldn't fly through space or regrow lost limbs. They couldn't survive underwater for hours or communicate through telepathy. When it was finally Cato's turn to speak, he stood up slowly and looked around the chamber. The alien representatives were barely paying attention to him. Some were having quiet conversations with each other, while others seemed to be reviewing data on their personal devices. The human military stands ready to defend our territory and assist our allies, Cato said in a clear, steady voice. We may not have the natural advantages of other species, but we have proven ourselves capable in the past. Chancellor Vextar's laugh was like the sound of metal scraping against stone. Capable of what exactly? Admiral, your ships are so slow that our scouts could fly circles around them. Your weapons fire simple metal projectiles, while we have plasma cannons that can melt asteroids. Your soldiers wear bulky armor just to survive in space, while most of us can operate in vacuum naturally. The other alien representatives joined in with their own criticisms. Speaker Krisa tilted her feathered head and spoke in a voice like wind chimes. Humans live such pathetically short lives. How can a species that barely exists for 100 years gain any real wisdom or experience? My people live for 500 years, and we learn from centuries of battle. Thokron's rocky face showed what might have been amusement. Human bodies are so fragile that a simple fall can break their bones. Our children play games that would kill adult humans. We have watched human soldiers die from injuries that we would not even notice. Bright Flow's glowing form pulsed with what seemed like laughter. They cannot even breathe the atmosphere of most planets without artificial assistance. They are trapped inside mechanical suits like prisoners in their own technology. How can such limited beings contribute anything meaningful to galactic defense? The criticism continued for nearly an hour. Each species found new ways to point out human weaknesses and limitations. They talked about how humans needed special equipment just to travel between stars, while other species had natural abilities that made space travel simple. They mentioned how human weapons were primitive compared to energy-based systems that could destroy entire fleets. Admiral Cato stood through it all with his hands clasped behind his back and his expression calm. He had expected this reaction, because it happened at every meeting. The other species saw humans as the weakest link in their alliance, barely worth including in important discussions. When the aliens finally finished listing human inadequacies, Chancellor Vextar leaned forward on his platform. "Admiral, do you have anything to say in defense of your primitive species, or shall we move on to discuss real military matters among the actual powers in this galaxy?" Cato took a deep breath and looked directly at the Chancellor. "You see our limitations, but you do not understand our strengths. We may not be able to fly through space or regrow lost body parts, but humans have something that none of your species seem to possess." "And what might that be?" Vextar asked with obvious skepticism. "We adapt," Cato replied. "We survive situations that should be impossible. We never give up even when everything seems hopeless. We take our weaknesses and find ways to turn them into advantages. We learn from every failure and come back stronger than before." The chamber erupted in laughter that echoed off the high walls. The sound was a mixture of different alien voices, creating a chorus of mockery that seemed to go on forever. Several representatives were doubled over with amusement while others made dismissive gestures with whatever appendages they possessed. Chancellor Vextar wiped tears from his yellow eyes. "Adapt. He says they cannot even adapt to breathing different air without machines. How exactly do you adapt your way out of being physically inferior to every other species in this chamber?" Cato remained calm despite the humiliation. "I suppose you will find out if we ever face a real threat together." As the meeting moved on to other topics, the alien representatives continued to make jokes about human weakness. They discussed trade agreements and territory disputes while treating the human delegate like an unwelcome guest at their important gathering. When the session finally ended, Admiral Cato walked toward the exit with his head held high. Despite the embarrassment he had endured, he maintained his dignity. The whispers and laughter followed him all the way to the doors, but he never looked back or showed any sign that their words had affected him outside the chamber. Cato paused for a moment and looked up at the artificial sky of the space station where the council met. The stars visible through the transparent dome seemed so peaceful and distant. He wondered if any of those points of light harbored threats that might test the galaxy's defenses in ways these arrogant species had never imagined. The aliens had made their judgment clear. Humans were weak, primitive creatures who barely deserved recognition in galactic affairs. They were useful for manual labor and basic manufacturing, but they had no place among the true powers of the galaxy. Their short lives and physical limitations made them irrelevant in any serious discussion of military strategy or defense. What the alien species did not understand was that being underestimated had always been humanity's greatest advantage throughout their history. 3 months had passed since Admiral Cato walked out of the Galactic Council chamber with alien laughter echoing behind him. The memory of that humiliation burned in his mind as he sat in his office on Earth, looking at routine reports from the outer colonies. Everything seemed normal in human space. Trade ships moved between systems carrying goods and passengers while mining operations continued on dozens of asteroids and moons. Captain Lee stood on the bridge of the patrol vessel Souls, pride as it completed another boring sweep of the outer system boundary. His crew had been doing the same patrol route for 2 years, without seeing anything more dangerous than space debris. The most exciting thing that ever happened was helping lost cargo ships find their way to the correct shipping lanes. Lieutenant Park sat at her communications station reviewing messages from the colonies. Most were routine supply requests or family letters being transmitted between star systems. She had been monitoring these channels for so long that she knew the regular patterns by heart. Colony 7 always requested more medical supplies on Tuesdays, while Colony 12 sent their weekly production reports every Friday morning. The attack came without any warning at all. Park's communication board suddenly exploded with red warning lights and alarm sounds that filled the bridge with urgent noise. Her hands flew over the controls as she tried to make sense of what was happening. The messages coming through were fragmented and full of panic, but one word kept repeating over and over: emergency. "Captain, we have multiple distress signals coming from Colony 7. Park called out with fear creeping into her voice. "They are reporting unknown vessels in their system. The transmissions are breaking up badly, but I think they said something about massive ships." Captain Lee moved quickly to the main display screen where tactical information was being updated in real time. The data showing Colony 7's position flickered and changed as new information arrived through the communication network. The colony had 2 million human settlers living on 3 different planets and several space stations. "Put the colony administrator on screen," Lee ordered while his crew worked frantically at their stations around the bridge park. Tried multiple communication channels but kept getting nothing except static and broken signals. "Sir, I cannot establish contact with Colony 7. The main communication array appears to be offline. All I am getting are automated emergency beacons and they keep cutting out." The main screen flickered and showed a brief transmission from Colony 7 that had been recorded minutes earlier. The image was shaky and filled with interference, but it showed something that made everyone on the bridge freeze in shock. Massive black ships were descending from space toward the colony worlds. These vessels were unlike anything in the known galaxy. Databases. The ships were enormous, easily twice the size of the largest human vessels and 3 times bigger than most alien military craft. Their hulls were dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Along their sides were weapon ports that glowed with an ominous red energy. The ships moved with purpose and coordination that suggested they were part of a large organized fleet. "How many ships are we looking at?" Lee asked as he studied the tactical display. "The sensors are having trouble getting accurate readings, sir, but preliminary scans suggest at least 50 vessels of various sizes," reported the tactical officer. "The largest ones are bigger than anything in our military database." More transmissions came through from other monitoring stations throughout human space. Colony 12 reported seeing similar black ships on the edge of their sensor range. The mining station at New Busan detected massive energy signatures approaching from deep space research. Station Alpha sent a brief message about unknown contacts before their signal went completely. Dead Lieutenant Park's face went pale as she received another communication. "Sir, Colony 15 just sent an emergency transmission. They report they are under attack by unknown hostile forces." The message cut off in the middle of transmission. Captain Lee watched the tactical display as red markers appeared across human territory. Each marker represented a colony or station that had gone silent. The pattern was clear and terrifying. These unknown attackers were not just raiding or exploring, they were systematically destroying every human settlement they encountered. "Send an immediate priority message to Earth Command," Lee ordered. "Tell them we have a massive hostile invasion force attacking multiple human colonies. Estimated enemy strength is unknown, but appears to be overwhelming. Request immediate military response." The communications officer worked quickly to send the emergency message while the bridge crew monitored incoming reports. The situation was getting worse by the minute. More colonies were reporting attacks or going completely silent. The attackers seemed to have unlimited numbers and weapons that could destroy entire settlements in hours. Within minutes, a response came back from Earth Command. The message was brief and shocking. Message received. Beginning emergency mobilization of all available forces. Estimated response time to outer colonies is 6 days. Minimum all patrol vessels are ordered to withdraw to defensive positions and avoid engagement with hostile forces. 6 days was far too long. The outer colonies would all be destroyed long before any help could arrive. Captain Lee realized that millions of human lives were being lost while he sat safely in his patrol ship, unable to do anything to help them. "Sir, we are receiving a transmission from the Galactic Council," Park announced. "It is addressed to all human military units." The main screen showed Chancellor Vextar sitting in what appeared to be his private office. The reptilian leader looked calm and unconcerned as he delivered his message. "We have received reports of attacks in human territory. The Galactic Council acknowledges your request for military assistance, however. Our analysis indicates this is a local problem that does not threaten other species' territories." Vextar continued speaking with the same arrogant tone he had used during the council meeting. "The Council recommends that human forces handle this situation using your own resources. We are confident that your adaptive abilities will prove sufficient to resolve this minor conflict. Our military assets are currently committed to more important matters." Transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. The alien species that had mocked human weakness just months ago were now abandoning humanity to face extinction alone. They had decided that human lives were not worth protecting, and that this invasion was not their problem. Captain Lee felt anger building in his chest as he realized the full scope of the betrayal. The same aliens who had laughed at human limitations were now refusing to help when those limitations were being tested by an unknown enemy. The species that had claimed superiority in military matters were hiding behind excuses while humans died. "Sir, what are your orders?" asked the tactical officer. Lee looked at the display showing the spreading destruction across human space. More red markers appeared every few minutes as additional colonies went silent. The enemy was moving faster than anyone had thought possible, and their weapons were more powerful than anything humans had ever faced. "Set course for Earth. Maximum speed," Lee ordered. "Send another message to Earth Command. Tell them the Galactic Council has refused to provide assistance. We are on our own against whatever these things are." As Soul's Pride turned toward home, Captain Lee watched the tactical display showing the expanding zone of destruction. The attackers were not just defeating human defenses, they were completely eliminating every trace of human presence in the systems they attacked. This was not conquest or occupation. This was systematic extermination. The species that had called humans weak and primitive were about to discover what happened when humanity faced extinction. The aliens had made a terrible mistake in abandoning their human allies because they were about to learn that desperate humans were the most dangerous humans of all. Lieutenant Park monitored the emergency channels as more reports came in from the few surviving observation posts. The enemy fleet was vast beyond imagination, and their technology was clearly superior to anything the galaxy had seen before. But something in the scattered reports suggested these attackers had one weakness. They were following predictable patterns. Captain Lee studied every piece of information they had gathered about the enemy ships. The attackers were powerful and numerous, but they seemed to rely entirely on overwhelming force. They showed no creativity or adaptability in their tactics. They simply arrived, destroyed everything, and moved on to the next target. For the first time since the attack began, Lee allowed himself a small smile. The aliens had dismissed humans as weak and limited, but they had forgotten the most important human characteristic. When cornered, humans did not give up, they got creative. The emergency command center deep beneath Earth's surface buzzed with frantic activity, as military leaders and scientists worked around the clock to find solutions to humanity's desperate situation. General Kim stood before massive holographic displays that showed the advancing enemy fleet with red markers indicating destroyed human colonies. The situation looked hopeless, but Kim had not survived 30 years of military service by giving up when things seemed impossible. Dr. Yoon sat at her workstation surrounded by data streams from the few surviving observation posts scattered throughout human space. She had been analyzing enemy attack patterns for 48 hours straight, surviving on nothing but coffee and determination. Her team of researchers worked alongside her, processing every scrap of information they could gather about the mysterious attackers. The aliens called themselves the Devourers, according to the few intercepted communications that human linguists had managed to decode. They had appeared from beyond the edge of known space with technology that seemed decades ahead of anything the galaxy possessed. Their ships could travel faster than light without using the standard jump gates that other Species required. The enemy vessels are using some kind of energy shielding that deflects our weapons, reported Chief Engineer Han as he reviewed combat data from the failed defense of Colony 7. Our plasma cannons and missile systems cannot penetrate their defensive barriers. Standard military tactics are completely ineffective against them. General Kim studied the tactical displays showing the size and scope of the Devourer fleet. The enemy had over 300 ships of various sizes, with the largest vessels being mobile fortresses that could level entire planets. Their smaller craft moved in coordinated swarms that overwhelmed any defense system they encountered. Dr. Yoon looked up from her data analysis with exhaustion written across her face. General, I have been studying their attack patterns, and I believe I have found something important. The Devourers are incredibly advanced, but they have one significant weakness: they think in rigid patterns, explained Kim, said as he moved closer to her workstation. Every attack follows the exact same sequence, Yoon continued. They arrive in the system with their main fleet. They deploy smaller ships to eliminate orbital defenses. Then they land ground forces to secure the planet. They never deviate from this pattern because it has always worked for them. The other military leaders gathered around as Yoon displayed her analysis on the main screen. Look at the timing data from all the colony attacks. The Devourers take exactly 47 minutes to neutralize orbital defenses, then another 32 minutes to establish ground control. They are so confident in their superior technology that they never consider the possibility of unexpected resistance. General, Kim felt the first spark of hope he had experienced since the invasion began. Are you suggesting we can use their predictability against them? More than that, Yoon replied with growing excitement. Their technology is so advanced that they cannot conceive of primitive tactics being effective against them. They expect their enemies to fight using the same high-tech methods they use. When we try to match their technology, we lose every time. Commander Cho stepped forward from the group of assembled officers. What are you proposing, Doctor, that we fight them with sticks and stones? Yoon smiled for the first time in days. Not exactly, but you are closer than you think. The Devourers scan for energy signatures from advanced weapon systems. They expect plasma cannons, particle beams, and fusion warheads. What they do not scan for are simple chemical explosives and kinetic projectiles. The room fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. Engineer Han was the first to understand. You want us to go back to using primitive weapons. I want us to use weapons they will not see coming, Yoon corrected. Their sensors are calibrated to detect threats from species with technology similar to their own. They are not looking for simple rockets filled with chemical explosives or metal projectiles fired from magnetic accelerators. General Kim began pacing as his tactical mind processed the possibilities. We cannot match their firepower, but we might be able to surprise them if we think like humans instead of trying to think like advanced aliens. Over the next 72 hours, human engineers and scientists worked on projects that seemed impossible under normal circumstances. They took mining equipment and converted it into weapons systems. They modified cargo ships to carry concealed armaments. They even experimented with using asteroid mining charges as improvised bombs. Captain Minho led the first test of these unconventional tactics when a Devourer scouting force approached the Mars colony. Instead of meeting them with traditional warships, the humans used converted mining vessels that appeared to be fleeing in panic. The enemy ships followed the standard pattern, closing in for an easy kill. What the Devourers did not expect was for the mining ships to suddenly release clouds of metallic debris into space, followed by chemical explosive charges that had been disguised as cargo containers. The primitive weapons created a chaotic environment that confused the alien sensors and damaged several enemy vessels. Target their communication arrays, Minho ordered as his disguised warships pressed their attack. If we can disrupt their coordination, they cannot follow their rigid patterns. The Devourer ships tried to adapt to the unexpected assault, but their tactics were designed for fighting other high-technology species. They had no procedures for dealing with enemies who used simple kinetic weapons and chemical explosives. Their advanced shields were calibrated to stop energy weapons but offered limited protection against physical projectiles. Lieutenant Sung piloted her modified cargo hauler directly toward the largest Devourer vessel, while enemy fire erupted around her ship, Her. Cargo hold was filled with mining explosives that had been rigged with simple timer devices. The plan was insane, but it was exactly the kind of desperate gamble that no advanced species would ever attempt. Impact in 30 seconds, she reported. Over the communication channel, all ships moved to minimum safe distance. The cargo ship struck the Devourer vessel just below its main weapon array and detonated in a massive explosion that sent shockwaves through both ships. The alien vessel's shields had been designed to absorb energy blasts, not physical impacts from suicide attacks. The damage was severe enough to force the enemy ship into emergency retreat. News of the successful defense spread throughout human space faster than official military communications. Ordinary civilians began volunteering for combat duty, while engineers worked on new ways to convert civilian equipment into weapons. The humans were finally fighting back, and winning. Dr. Yoon monitored the battle results from the command center as more reports came in from across human territory. The Devourers are confused, she announced to the assembled military leaders. They are sending reconnaissance flights to all the systems where we successfully defended colonies. They are trying to understand what happened. General Kim allowed himself a moment of satisfaction as he watched tactical displays showing enemy movements. How long before they adapt to our new tactics? That depends on how rigid their thinking really is, Yoon replied. If they are truly locked into their patterns of behavior, it could take them weeks to develop effective countermeasures that gives us time to develop even more unconventional strategies. The first major test came when the Devourers sent a full invasion fleet toward the Luna colony orbiting Earth's moon. Human defenders had prepared for weeks using every trick they could devise. The battle would determine whether human creativity could overcome alien technology. Colonel Park commanded the defense from a hidden bunker built into the lunar surface. Remember everyone, the enemy expects us to meet them in space with traditional warships. Instead, we are going to let them land exactly where we want them to land. Esau. Devourer fleet arrived and followed their standard pattern, deploying in orbit and preparing to eliminate the colony's defenses. What they found instead were apparently defenseless settlements and no orbital resistance. The aliens interpreted this as evidence that the humans had already evacuated or surrendered. As enemy landing craft descended toward the lunar surface, they triggered hidden proximity sensors that activated thousands of mining charges buried throughout the landing zones. The explosions created massive craters and dust clouds that disrupted Devourer communications and scattered their ground forces. Phase 2 begin, Park ordered, as human fighters emerged from underground hangars using tunnels that had been carved into the moon's crust weeks earlier. The Devourers had never encountered an enemy that used their own environment as a weapon. They had conquered dozens of species, but none had ever thought to turn an entire moon into a trap. The confusion in their ranks was obvious as their rigid command structure struggled to adapt to a situation that had no precedent in their military doctrine. For the first time since the invasion began, humans had not just survived a Devourer attack, they had won decisively. The victory proved that human weakness could become human strength when combined with creativity and the willingness to try tactics that seemed impossible. 6 months after the Devourer invasion began, Admiral Kato stood on the bridge of the massive human flagship Incheon Rising as it led a fleet of over 200 vessels toward the final enemy stronghold. The same man who had been humiliated in the Galactic Council chamber was now commanding the largest military force humanity had ever assembled. The human fleet looked nothing like the slow, primitive ships that alien species had mocked just months earlier. Each vessel had been modified, with weapons and tactics learned through desperate battles against superior technology. The cargo ships had hidden fighter bays, the mining vessels carried experimental weapons, and even civilian transports had been converted into mobile command. Center's Captain Song stood beside the Admiral, watching tactical displays that showed the approaching Devourer home fleet. The enemy had gathered every remaining ship into a final defensive formation around their main base. The alien vessels still outnumbered human forces by 3-1, and their individual ships remained more powerful than anything humanity possessed. Admiral, we are receiving long-range scans of the enemy position, reported the sensor officer. The Devourer fleet consists Of approximately 600 vessels, including 12 of their largest fortress ships, each fortress is capable of destroying an entire planet. Cato studied the tactical information without showing any concern on his weathered face. He had learned, during months of warfare, that human victory came not from matching enemy strength, but from using enemy strength against itself. The Devourers were about to make their final mistake by gathering all their forces in one location throughout human. Space civilians watched news broadcasts showing the approaching final battle. Everyone understood that this engagement would determine whether humanity survived or joined the dozens of other species that the Devourers had completely eliminated. The stakes could not be higher, but somehow the mood among humans was confident rather than fearful. Dr. Yoon monitored the battle preparations from her command center on Earth, where she coordinated the technical aspects of humanity's war effort. Her team had developed new weapons and tactics specifically for this final confrontation. They had studied every piece of Devourer technology and found weaknesses that the aliens did not know existed. All human ships, this is Admiral Cato came, the voice over fleet communications. Today we fight not just for our own survival, but to show the galaxy what it means to never surrender. The enemy thinks they are stronger because they have bigger ships and more advanced weapons. They are about to learn that strength comes from the heart, not from technology. The Devourer Fleet Master Corvin watched the approaching human fleet from his command ship and felt confident. Despite months of frustrating battles, the humans had been clever and resourceful, but they were still primitives facing the most advanced military force in known space. His final fleet contained enough firepower to sterilize entire star systems. All vessels prepare for combat. Corvin ordered, "We will destroy these persistent creatures once and for all. Then we can proceed with conquering the rest of this galaxy." The battle began when the two fleets came within weapons range, and the space between them exploded with energy blasts and projectile fire. The Devourer ships opened fire with their massive plasma cannons, expecting to vaporize the human vessels before they could close to effective combat distance. But the human fleet did not behave like any military force the Devourers had ever fought. Instead of forming traditional battle lines, the human ships scattered into hundreds of small groups that attacked from every direction. Simultaneously, each group used different tactics, making it impossible for the alien commanders to develop effective countermeasures. Lieutenant Chen piloted her fighter through the chaos of the massive battle, as explosions lit up the darkness around her ship. The Devourer vessels were so large that she could fly inside their weapon ranges where their guns could not target her effectively. She carried simple chemical explosives that could damage critical systems if placed precisely. Target their power distribution networks, she called to her squadron over the communication channel. If we can overload their energy systems, their shields will fail. The human fighters swarmed around the Devourer fortress ships like insects attacking giants. Each fighter was individually insignificant, but together, they created a level of chaos that the alien command structure could not handle. The Devourers were used to fighting enemies who followed predictable military doctrines. Captain Dong commanded a group of converted cargo ships that approached the main Devourer fortress from an unexpected angle. His vessels appeared to be supply ships, trying to escape the battle, but they were actually carrying the largest collection of improvised explosives ever assembled by human engineers. "Remember everyone, we only get one chance at this," Dong announced to his crews. "Once we reveal our true purpose, the enemy will focus all their firepower on us. Make every shot count." The cargo ships suddenly opened their holds and released thousands of small drones that had been built from mining equipment and civilian electronics. Each drone carried a simple but effective warhead, and they moved too fast for Devourer sensors to track accurately. The alien point defense systems were overwhelmed by sheer numbers. What happened next had never occurred in Devourer military history. The human drones penetrated the flagship's defenses and detonated throughout the massive vessel, causing cascading failures in critical systems. The fortress ship that had seemed invulnerable began breaking apart as internal explosions tore through its hull fleet. Master Corvin felt his command ship shaking apart around him as human weapons caused damage that should have been impossible. The primitives had somehow found ways to turn his own ship's power systems against itself. He realized with growing horror that the Devourers were not just losing this battle, they were being completely outfought. All ships retreat to minimum safe distance, Corvin ordered as his flagship began evacuation procedures. Send surrender signals to the human fleet, Admiral. Cato received the surrender transmission and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction before responding. The species that had seemed unstoppable just months earlier was now begging for mercy from the humans they had tried to exterminate. As news of the victory spread throughout the galaxy, the reaction was immediate and dramatic. The same alien species that had refused to help humanity during the crisis were now sending urgent messages requesting protection from other threats. The Galactic Council that had dismissed humans as weak primitives was now begging for military assistance. Chancellor Vextar appeared on Admiral Cato's communication screen, looking nothing like the arrogant leader who had mocked humanity in the council chamber. His reptilian features showed something that might have been fear mixed with desperate hope. Admiral Cato, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I want to formally apologize for our previous attitude toward your species, Vextar said, with obvious difficulty. We now realize that we gravely underestimated human capabilities, and we would like to discuss new terms for our alliance. Cato looked at the alien leader who had laughed at human weakness just months earlier. Now that same leader was practically begging for human protection against threats that might emerge in the future. The irony was not lost on the Admiral, but he chose to respond with dignity rather than revenge. Chancellor, the human species has always been willing to help our friends and allies, Cato replied calmly. The question is whether you are prepared to treat us as equals rather than as inferior beings who barely deserve recognition. The transformation was immediate and complete. The Galactic Council voted unanimously to grant humanity full membership with voting rights equal to the most powerful species. The same aliens who had mocked human limitations now competed to offer trade agreements and military cooperation. Throughout human space, people celebrated not just their survival, but their recognition as a major power in galactic affairs. The species that had been dismissed as weak and primitive had proven that determination and creativity were more valuable than natural advantages or advanced technology. The war against the Devourers had ended, but its consequences would reshape the galaxy for generations to come. Humanity had earned its place among the stars not through superior strength or technology, but by demonstrating the unbreakable human spirit that turns ordinary people into heroes when everything seems hopeless. Never again would any species make the mistake of underestimating what humans could accomplish when their backs were against the wall. The weak had become the strong, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Devourer Fleet Master Corvin stood in the command chamber of his flagship, staring at tactical displays that showed something impossible. His species had conquered 47 different civilizations across 12 galaxies, and never once had they encountered resistance that lasted more than a few days. The humans should have been eliminated weeks ago, yet somehow they were still fighting. Report, Corvin commanded in his deep, metallic voice as his subordinates worked frantically at their control stations. Fleet Master, the humans are using tactics we have never encountered before, replied his chief tactical officer. They hide inside asteroids and attack our ships with primitive chemical weapons. They disguise their warships as cargo vessels and ram our cruisers with explosive devices. Their fighters are so small and fast that our targeting systems cannot lock onto them effectively. Corvin's forearms gestured angrily at the displays showing human space. These creatures are supposed to be the weakest species in this galaxy. According to our intelligence, they cannot even breathe different atmospheres without mechanical assistance. How are they preventing our conquest? The tactical displays showed the current state of the war, and it was not what Corvin had expected when the invasion began. 12 human colonies had been destroyed in the first wave of attacks, but since then, the Devourers had been unable to capture any additional territory. The humans seemed to learn from every defeat and adapt their tactics faster than any species the Devourers had ever fought. Commander Jin led a small fleet of converted human cargo ships toward the heavily defended Devourer base at Colony 7. The alien stronghold was protected by massive energy shields and orbital weapons platforms that could destroy traditional warships from thousands of kilometers away. But Jin was not planning a traditional attack. All ships maintain refugee formation, Jin ordered over the communication channel. Make sure your engines are running rough and your hull plating looks damaged. We want them to think we are desperate survivors fleeing from another battle. The human ships moved slowly toward the Devourer base with their external lights flickering and smoke trailing from their engines. Everything about their approach suggested they were damaged vessels seeking shelter or surrender. The alien commanders watched the approaching ships and saw exactly what they expected, to see more weak humans running away from superior force. Inside the cargo holds of Jin's ships, hundreds of human fighters waited in powered-down spacecraft that were invisible to Devourer sensors. The plan was risky beyond belief, but it was exactly the kind of desperate gamble that had been working for humanity since the war began. The aliens expected conventional tactics, and humans specialized in being unconventional. Enemy vessels are taking the bait, reported Lieutenant Nam from her position. In the lead cargo ship, Devourer fleet is moving to intercept us in standard formation. They are not scanning for concealed weapons. The Devourer ships closed in for what their commanders thought would be an easy victory. Their massive vessels bristled with energy weapons that could vaporize the human cargo ships in seconds, but they were following their standard procedures, which meant they would demand surrender before opening fire. Unknown human vessels, you are ordered to surrender immediately, came the transmission from the Devourer fleet commander. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will result in immediate destruction. Jin smiled as he heard the alien demand. It was exactly what he had been hoping for. All ships begin evasive maneuvers and release the surprise package. The human cargo ship suddenly split open along hidden seams, releasing swarms of small fighter craft that had been concealed inside the Devourer sensors. Immediately detected the new contacts, but their targeting computers were overwhelmed by the sheer number of small, fast-moving targets. Captain Yuki piloted her fighter through the chaos of the battle, as energy blasts from Devourer weapons lit up the space around her. The alien ships were so large that they had trouble tracking individual human fighters, and their own weapons were too powerful for precision targeting. Focus on their communication arrays, Yuki called out to her squadron. If we can cut their ability to coordinate, they will be fighting blind. The human fighters swarmed around the massive Devourer vessels like angry insects attacking creatures thousands of times their size. Each fighter carried simple but effective weapons that could damage specific systems on the enemy ships. The aliens had shields that could stop energy weapons, but kinetic projectiles and chemical explosives still caused significant damage. What the Devourers had not expected was for the human fighters to target their psychological weak points as well as their technological ones. The alien commanders were used to fighting enemies who followed military protocols and tried to minimize their own casualties. The humans seemed willing to sacrifice everything to achieve victory. Lieutenant Kang flew his damaged fighter directly into the sensor array of a Devourer cruiser, causing a massive explosion that blinded the entire ship to incoming attacks. His sacrifice allowed a dozen other human fighters to attack the vessel's weapon systems, without being detected until it was too late. The battle lasted for 6 hours, and ended with something that had never happened in Devourer military history. A human fleet had defeated a superior alien force through tactics that no military academy had ever taught. The Devourers retreated from Colony 7, leaving behind damaged ships and confused commanders. News of the victory spread throughout human space, faster than official military communications. Civilian volunteers flooded recruitment centers while engineers worked day and night to convert more cargo ships into hidden carriers. The humans had discovered that their greatest weakness could become their greatest strength. Back on the Devourer flagship Fleetmaster, Corvin stared at casualty reports that seemed impossible. His forces had lost 12 major vessels and over 300 fighters to an enemy that should not have been able to damage a single ship. The humans were using weapons and tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. How can primitive creatures with chemical rockets defeat our plasma cannons? Corvin demanded of his science officers. Their technology is centuries behind ours, yet they continue to inflict unacceptable losses on our fleets. The chief science officer hesitated before answering. Fleet Master. The humans do not follow logical patterns in their warfare. They seem willing to sacrifice their lives for strategic advantages that we cannot calculate. They use their own weaknesses as weapons against us. Corvin's massive form shuddered with rage. Weaknesses cannot be weapons, that is impossible. Perhaps Fleet Master, but the humans appear to believe otherwise. They turn their short lifespans into reckless courage. They use their technological limitations to create surprises we cannot predict. They fight as if victory is more important than survival. For the first time in his long military career, Corvin felt something he had never experienced before: uncertainty. The Devourers had always won through superior technology and overwhelming force, but the humans were proving that creativity and determination could overcome both advantages. Meanwhile, in the Galactic Council chambers, Chancellor Vextar received reports about the ongoing war between humans and the mysterious Devourer fleet. The news was troubling because it suggested that the humans were not being eliminated as quickly as expected. Perhaps we should reconsider our position regarding military assistance to the human territories, suggested Speaker Kreesa during an emergency council session. If these Devourers defeat the humans, they may continue attacking other species. Vextar dismissed the concern with a wave of his clawed hand. The humans will be defeated eventually. Their primitive tactics cannot succeed against truly advanced technology. The Devourers will finish them soon, and then move on to easier targets. But deep inside, the Chancellor felt a growing unease. The same humans he had mocked as weak and limited were somehow surviving against an enemy that possessed technology beyond anything the Galactic Council had ever seen. If the humans could fight such a foe to a standstill, what did that say about their true capabilities? The war was entering a new phase, and for the first time since the invasion began, it was not clear who would emerge victorious. The Devourers had expected quick conquest, but instead found themselves locked in a prolonged conflict with an enemy who refused to follow any known rules of warfare. Human creativity was proving to be more dangerous than alien technology, and that realization was beginning to spread throughout the galaxy.